I'd like to welcome José Tallaj. José is a rising senior at Columbia University, majoring in history and art history. Originally from Birmingham, Alabama, he has always been interested in art and museums since he was young and plans to pursue a career in museum work after college. Let's welcome José.
All right, thank you, Klaudia, for the introduction. So, as Klaudia said, my name is José Tallaj. I am a rising senior at Columbia University studying history and art history, and I'm an arts administration fellow at KODA this summer. And the name of my zine, as you can see, is called Uprooted, Betty U and the City. So, firstly, let me tell you a little story before I get into this. So one of my hobbies that I like doing is this kind of activity that's called geocaching, right? It's this treasure hunting kind of outdoor activity where people hide little caches around places, and you get coordinates and you go and find them, right? And sometimes to get the coordinates you have to solve some sort of puzzle to get the numbers, right? And one of these puzzles that I was solving for a geocache in Central Park, you had to go on Google Maps and look at certain places that had something to do with, like, it had something, like there was some reference, maybe a statue that referenced a number or something. Anyway, so when I was on Google Maps, I was looking at this neighborhood, and on Google Maps there's a feature where you can go on, you can look back at the previous captures. So you can look back at like 2009, 2013 captures. So when you looked back, I went to this neighborhood, and when you looked back in 2009, 2013, it was, it was a normal neighborhood. It was people outside in the streets. It was very lively. There were lots of people and lots of shops, mom and pop shops, small shops, and stuff like that, right? And then I fast forwarded to 2024, 2025, and it was very strange. There were so much less people on the streets. All of these stores and all this housing had been kind of converted into high-rise condos, and the stores had all been replaced by these, big budget, big, well-known stores and very expensive stores, and it really got me thinking about the change of neighborhoods at that moment. Before then, when I came to the city, I'd heard stories about families being displaced from their homes because they couldn't afford them anymore. I heard stories about immigrant families having to move to different neighborhoods, even though they had ties to the neighborhoods that they were from. And it didn't really hit me until that moment that visually seeing it, how much of an impact it really had, I could see on the visual layout on the city, but also how it had on my perception. And also, I really related to this because, as the son of an immigrant, son of immigrants, I understand really very much the struggle and the plight that a lot of immigrants have to go through, and to go to these neighborhoods and then moving again because you're being displaced is something that really got into my mind. And I think I became really passionate about this issue when I got to New York for college. I got really, really passionate about this, and I think I got really passionate especially now under the encroaching fascism of this presidential administration, targeting of immigrants and racism and bigotry, and so that was what I was really searching for and I was really interested in. And so when I was searching for an artist to research for KODA, I discovered Betty U. So who is Betty U? Betty U is a multimedia artist based in New York. She grew up in Sunset Park, in the Chinatown part of Sunset Park specifically. She was born to Chinese immigrant garment workers, and she works primarily in collage and photography and film. Her main themes include themes of familial history, immigration, and displacement. And so I chose her because not only did I really, really enjoy her art, but I resonated a lot with the themes that she explored, themes of displacement and immigration, something that I said when I was talking about earlier about why I was very interested in that. I'd also done a project, I've done a project where I've gotten a seed grant from Columbia to do a workshop on critical cartography. So it was already something that I knew was something, and she had done a project with KODA surrounding critical cartography. So it was something I was already very much interested in. And I also related to her on a personal level because we are both also the offspring of immigrants, and I think there's a lot of solidarity that comes through that through it with that that I felt I really enjoyed and what I really wanted to create for this project. So my approach for the interview, I had 2 questions here. How did I approach my topic? What questions did I think of? And so my main kind of approach was thinking about the KODA archive. I mainly asked my question is what is KODA missing from Betty U in terms of her archive, and how can my project kind of encapsulate her work? I wanted my zine and my overall project to be kind of emblematic of her art as a whole, almost like a retrospective of sorts, something that future people can go into the KODA archive and see and be like, so this is who Betty U is. And so in terms of the question, I had prepared so many questions, but I had to focus on 6. So many questions. There were some things that I wanted to ask her about. There were some things about, I know she focuses also on like anti-war art, and also she also is like a big proponent of transgender equality. So I really wanted to ask her questions surrounding that, but obviously the scope of my project is very narrow. So I only focused on these 6 questions. First, I asked her a basic question about her biography. Then I asked kind of about childhood experiences, what that kind of shaped her as an artist and an activist. I also asked her about her ethical frameworks, and she also deals with oral history and also deals with kind of interview style and also documentarian style artistic works. I also asked her about how she saw the relationship between the people of color and their communities change in New York with their neighborhoods, and how she has seen that throughout the years and through her work. I then asked her about resistance, what types of resistance she has seen against forms of urban renewal in New York. And then finally, I just asked her kind of a 2-part question about the future of her practice, but also what she believes is kind of the future of these communities and what will happen in the future if there's any hope. So I decided to focus on kind of 4 main themes: immigration, labor rights, familial history, and gentrification. And I kind of kept a very strict ethical framework that I'd been taught by the fellowship by Cynthia about keeping an ethical framework when it comes to oral history. So obviously before the interview, I gave her a consent form. I sent her the questions beforehand so she would know what I would be asking her. And also to set up whether or not to meet in person or over Zoom. We did have to meet over Zoom because she is 8 months pregnant, so I didn't want to do it. I didn't want to strain her for anything else from what she was already dealing with in her condition. So, as for the interview itself, I'm going to be very honest. I was very, very, very nervous for this interview. But in the beginning, before we recorded, we chatted a little bit about, she wanted to know a little bit about myself and about KODA and what I was doing with KODA. And keeping up with kind of the ethical framework, I let her know about when I was recording. When I was basically I'm going to record now. You can strike things off the record and stuff like that. I was very happy with the interview because she was very responsive to my questions and even kind of connected it to my own experiences that I talked about in the beginning of the Zoom call. And I think it kind of kept what I really wanted to happen with the interview, which is I didn't want it to feel like an interview per se. I wanted to feel more like a conversation. I didn't want to put myself on a pedestal and kind of getting information and then leaving, as I had been taught in the fellowship. I wanted it to kind of feel like a conversation and to feel like we were on an open field. During the interview, I did have to end and restart the Zoom call because on my Zoom account, there is a time limit on on my meeting time. So I did have to, like, later on, I did have to cut together kind of like the audio clips. But I think the interview did end very nicely, and I think after editing the audio and also kind of editing kind of the ending of the audio, which I kind of had to, because I kind of forgot to end it. I forgot to end the recording before the Zoom call ended, so I had to edit some stuff out. But I ended up doing making a transcript using WebDescript and including timestamps, and also editing kind of like punctuation mistakes and editing kind of the ending, as I told you about. And I also showed her the transcript to make sure everything was okay, and if she wanted to strike anything off the record, she could. Yeah. Now it's time for the zine. So for the zine itself, I used Canva. I also used a lot of pictures from Betty's own artwork, with permission from her, of course. And as for the zine format, I wanted it to look a lot like her art. Her art focuses a lot on like collage and stuff like that. So I wanted to have a collage style zine. And for each, I dedicated 4 pages to the 4 different themes I talked to you about gentrification, immigration, familial history, and yeah. You'll see. Yeah, for each of these topics, I included 2 quotes from the interview and 2 annotations, as you will see. Hopefully you guys can see. But yeah. Here's the title page. I decided to name it Uprooted because rooted was kind of a word that kept coming up in the interview that was, I think, was kind of emblematic of what I believe was happening, and like I think it really that word stuck in my mind throughout the entire interview. And also it's a reference to this book called Root Shock by Dr. Fulilove. It's about kind of the psychological aspects of being displaced and the psychological aspects of gentrification. So it's also a reference to that, which I do also reference in the introduction. So I included an introduction. A lot of it here is just kind of what I'm talking about now, about my process, about but also I did include a quote from Root Shock. It's the kind of the last line of the book, which I thought was really impactful, which is, "Let us listen to the bell, it tolls for us, it's time to go home." Yeah. So this first section is about labor and labor rights. So the 2 quotes here mentioned is, this first one is about Betty talking about her parents working very long hours, 12, 13, 14, 15 hours a day, because her parents were sweatshop laborers. And it's just kind of emblematic of kind of the garment industry at the time, in the 70s and 80s, that it was starting to deteriorate. The conditions were starting to deteriorate very rapidly, which kind of relates to the theme of labor. And also the second quote is about one of the experiences that Betty remembers is about her sister being involved in a hunger strike against this restaurant called Jing Fong, it was a restaurant in Chinatown that was paying their workers 15 cents an hour. And so there was a hunger strike that was enacted, and it did end. The hunger strike did end because the Attorney General of New York found the restaurant in violation of labor rights. So both of these quotes kind of embody kind of like the history of sweatshop labor, but also immigrant labor in the city, that I thought was very important and also contextual of Betty's work. This next page is about immigration. This next topic is about immigration. This first quote is kind of about how she kind of sees how her parents never really she had to get a lot of information from her parents about like their immigration process and stuff like that. And I can like, she says about like this idea of like the trauma that they don't want to pass on to their kids. Something that I do also relate to a lot. This idea of like immigrant parents don't want to impact their children with the trauma of maybe the possible trauma of even immigrating into another country. And the second quote is about kind of how her parents met. Her dad fled China because China in the 70s was in a pretty rough state. And so he first fled to Hong Kong, which at the time was still a British colony. And that's where he met her mom. And I think like this story kind of embodies kind of a lot of experiences that a lot of immigrants, especially in this city, have, where they're being forcibly displaced from their own places and coming to New York to join other communities or join people who they know as a form of kind of like chain immigration and stuff like that. So I thought that was also very, very important to who she was and her art style and stuff like that. This next one is about familial history. So this first quote is kind of about, she said that basically that people, you know, the art of kind of oral history and familial history is a kind of an art form that is dying out, or it's something that in society kind of tells you is undervalued. As I say in the annotation, as kind of like DNA kits and genealogy becomes more popular, oral stories and kind of family stories becomes very much declining as something that's very unpopular. And she, you know, emphasizes the importance of knowing your family history and knowing the oral history of who your family was, who the history of your family and who your important family members were and how they got to this country or stuff like that, which I thought was very impactful when it comes to familial history. And the second quote is about kind of her own process. She came out with a book very recently called Family Amnesia, and in the book she uses a lot of her great-grandfather's or grandfather's archive that she found, and she learned. She tells me a lot about like the process of finding out about a lot of things about her her ancestors, including kind of like how her great-grandfather was, you know, had roots. Her family had roots in Chinatown before her parents moved to America, before the Chinese Exclusion Act in the 1880s. And so she learned about her great-grandfather, who was a labor activist and an amateur photographer, something that she could relate to a lot. And it's something that she would never have discovered if she didn't, you know, read these archives, because of things that weren't passed down to her. Which I thought was very important when it comes to familial history, and something that she does work with a lot, especially with her new book. And then this final topic is gentrification and resistance. This first quote, she talks about kind of the way she sees gentrification happening in the Chinatown part of Sunset Park. She sees the way that gentrification happens is that these companies, usually transnational companies, like East Asian companies, will come in and you know, will be very, you know, they will look. She says here, they look like us, but they're not like us. They're companies that are there to gentrify the neighborhood, and so it was really interesting to see this perspective on Sunset Park, something that I had not known was happening. And the second quote is kind of talking about her own resistance to what she's been doing. She has this organization called Chinatown Art Brigade. It's an organization that deals with kind of like stuff like around the kind of Chinatown community about like anti-gentrification and stuff like that through art. And she has actively been fighting against this jail that's being built in Chinatown, because there were talks that Rikers Island was going to be closed, and they were going to replace Rikers Island with these really, really tall jails, touted as the tallest jail in the world, and one of them was going to be built in Chinatown. And her kind of activity, or her kind of her resistance kind of comes through her organization going against this Chinatown jail, which is very unpopular. And another kind of thing that she mentions that's not here, but she mentions also Industry City, which is kind of a complex in Sunset Park that was actively trying to kind of gentrify a lot of the Chinatown part of Sunset Park. And what they were originally going to do was going to expand and kind of lead to like rezoning of the area. And she talks about this when there was a town hall meeting happening over Zoom, a bunch of protesters flooded it and basically got the project canceled. So it's stuff like that in these sorts of resistance that she sees in these areas, and I think was just really inspiring towards me and to me. And it was something that I didn't know was happening, and I knew about these problems that were happening, but it was something that I've been looking like forward to learning more about. It's about these resistance movements that were happening in the city that I really, really wanted to know about. And I think this is probably like my favorite topic that was talked about because of that. So here's my curatorial reflection. This also kind of goes into my process, and I kind of go into a process such as kind of like ethics, the construction of the zine, etc., like I was talking about, and also kind of my personal takeaways. And I think my personal takeaway kind of is that I had really, I'd learned the first step. I knew what gentrification was. I knew what displacement was, but I didn't know how to fight it or how to resist it. That was kind of my main goal into coming into this. And I think learning about Yu's work and learning about what she's been doing in the community has been extremely, extremely inspiring. And I think, as I say in the end of the reflection, kind of, as constructing the zine was just as kind of almost like a meditative process that she also mentions herself as her art, a meditative process into like learning about gentrification, finding out ways to resist this form of urban renewal. And just as as I was constructing the zine, just as I was doing that, as that was reflective and meditative, I hope that reading the zine and stuff like that, and for future readers for the KODA archive, it will hopefully do the same. That will move them to action and do something that's right in any form that's possible, either through art or through in-person organizing, volunteering, stuff like that. So this bios and pictures, and yeah, thank you so much.
I have a reflection. I don't know, how many of you have been to Coney Island?
Wait, we were just there.
Yeah, we were just there. I was just there.
That has been happening. They're trying to build a casino.
Casino, yes.
So we really, as a community, need to get on it. As a Russian person who grew up in that neighborhood, I moved to Bay Ridge at a certain point, but that's a big part of my identity and I would like to preserve it. So if you guys, after this talk, could go and Google and sign the petition, that would be awesome.
Thank you. I agree. Yes.
So based on what you learned and how you were inspired from Better You, Jose, I'm curious to know, is there a neighborhood or community that you feel passionate about, whether in New York or where you come from, that you feel inspired to take action? We spoke about Coney Island.
I thought a lot about Coney Island. I was also kind of thinking a lot about Washington Heights. I know there's some gentrification efforts happening in Washington Heights, especially as a community. I was not raised in Washington Heights. I was born in the South, but it's a community because I am Dominican American. It's a community that has a lot of Dominicans in it, and it's something. I am very passionate about that community too because of how much it's part of my identity, kind of everybody knows about Washington Heights and every Dominican knows about Washington Heights, and it's something that's really sad to see, and it's also something that I do not want happening kind of happening for that neighborhood too.